They called her the Ghost Servant. For 21 years, Isolde Marin had drifted through the halls of the Thornwood Keep like a specter, invisible to everyone except those who needed someone to blame. She was a pack-less wolf, a creature without a tether to any alpha, any bloodline, and any future. But the nobles of the Thornwood pack didn't know what lurked beneath her silence. They didn't know that the collar around her neck wasn't just iron. It was a prison for something ancient. When the Alpha King himself demands to know why she bears no mate mark, her whispered answer doesn't just surprise him. It ignites something feral in his blood. Something that hasn't stirred in 300 years. Brace yourself, because the wolf they tried to bury is clawing her way out, and she's bringing hellfire with her. The servants' quarters of Thornwood Keep smelled of mildew, rusted iron, and the faint copper tang of old blood. It was the night of the Crimson Conclave, the once-in-a-decade gathering where every alpha on the continent would converge to renew their oaths to the throne, and, if the rumors held true, where the reclusive Alpha King would finally choose a queen. Isolde Marin knelt on the cracked stone floor, scrubbing a wine stain that had been there longer than she had been alive. Her fingers were numb. The water in her bucket had gone cold hours ago, but no one had brought fresh. No one ever did. She was 21, an age when most wolves had already found their mates, established their rank, carved out their place in the brutal hierarchy. But Isolde had no place. She was the anomaly. A wolf who had never shifted, never felt the call of a pack bond, never heard the voice of her inner beast. The iron collar around her throat made sure of that. "Still alive, are we?" The voice slithered down the corridor like oil on water. Isolde didn't look up. She knew that voice better than her own heartbeat. Morrigan Voss, daughter of the Thornwood Beta, a statuesque redhead with a smile like a knife's edge and a soul to match. Morrigan's heels clicked against the stone as she approached. "I wasn't sure you'd survive the week," Morrigan continued, stopping just close enough for her perfume to burn Isolde's nostrils. Jasmine and something darker. Possession. After that little incident with the Alpha's hunting cloak, Isolde's hands stilled on the brush. The incident. She had been ordered to clean the cloak. She had cleaned it perfectly. But Morrigan had poured ash on it afterward and blamed her anyway. The punishment had been 15 lashes and 3 days without food. "I heal," Isolde said quietly, resuming her scrubbing. A boot came down on her hand. Not hard enough to break bones, Morrigan was too clever for that, but hard enough to grind her knuckles against the rough stone. Isolde sucked in a breath but didn't cry out. Crying out was what Morrigan wanted. "You don't speak unless spoken to," Morrigan hissed, leaning down until her breath was hot on Isolde's ear. "And you certainly don't speak to the guests tonight. The Alpha King's entourage is already in the eastern wing. If I catch you anywhere near them, I'll have that collar tightened until you can't swallow your own spit." She released Isolde's hand and straightened, smoothing down her emerald gown. "The banquet hall needs to be spotless before the first course, every glass polished, every candle lit." "And Isolde?" Morrigan paused at the corner, glancing back with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do try not to exist too loudly tonight. Some of us are trying to secure a future." She vanished around the corner, her laughter echoing off the stone. Isolde sat back on her heels, cradling her throbbing hand. She could feel the faint pulse of something beneath her sternum. Not pain, not quite. Something deeper. Something that had been stirring for weeks now, ever since the announcement of the conclave. She didn't understand it. She had no wolf. The collar made sure of that. And yet, tonight, a voice whispered from somewhere inside her chest, "Everything changes tonight." Isolde shook her head, pushing the voice away. Voices meant madness. Madness meant death. She picked up her brush and kept scrubbing. By the time the sun bled into the horizon, Thornwood Keep had transformed into something from a fever dream. Isolde moved through the servants' passages, carrying a tray of crystal goblets that weighed more than her weekly rations. Through the gaps in the stone, she caught glimpses of the great hall, a cathedral of candlelight and shadow. Thousands of flames danced in iron chandeliers. The walls were draped in crimson silk, the color of oaths and bloodshed. And the wolves. She had never seen so many powerful wolves in one place. Alphas from every territory stalked the marble floors in tailored suits and gowns that cost more than her life was worth. Their scents collided in the air, pine and smoke, amber and iron, dominance layered upon dominance until the atmosphere itself felt heavy enough to crush bone. But there was one scent that cut through all of it. Isolde froze mid-step, nearly dropping the tray. It hit her like a blade between the ribs, winter frost, burning cedar, and something underneath that she couldn't name. Something ancient. Something that made the thing beneath her sternum lurch. Mate. The word erupted in her mind unbidden, and she stumbled, catching herself against the wall. No. That was impossible. She had no wolf. She couldn't sense mates. She couldn't sense anything. But the pull was undeniable. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Isolde pressed her eye to a crack in the passage wall. And there he was, the Alpha King. Kalen Drakemore sat on a throne of black iron at the head of the hall, looking as though he had been carved from the same mountain that bore his keep. His hair was dark as a moonless night, swept back from a face that belonged on ancient coins. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth. His eyes were the color of molten gold, and they were utterly, terrifyingly bored. He was surrounded by fawning nobles, simpering alphas offering their daughters, their territories, their souls. He acknowledged none of them. His fingers drummed against the armrest of his throne with the impatience of a predator forced to sit through a performance. Isolde couldn't look away. He's beautiful, she thought, and immediately hated herself for it. Men like him didn't notice women like her. Men like him stepped on women like her without breaking stride. And yet the pull tightened. The thing beneath her sternum pulsed like a second heartbeat, straining toward him through the stone and the silk, and the 100 bodies between them. As if he felt it too, Kalen's drumming stopped. His molten gaze lifted from the crowd below, and locked directly onto the crack in the wall where Isolde was hiding. She jerked back, heart slamming against her ribs. Impossible. He couldn't have seen her. The passage was pitch black. The crack was barely an inch wide, but she could still feel his gaze, burning through the stone like a brand. Run! Her instinct screamed. Run now! Isolde didn't run. She pressed herself against the wall, trembling, and the tray of goblets rattling in her white-knuckled grip, and waited for the hammer to fall. The hammer came 3 hours later, and it wore Morrigan's face. Isolde had managed to avoid the great hall, keeping to the kitchens, the cellars, the forgotten corners of the keep where no one of importance ever ventured. But the Alpha King had demanded entertainment, and Morrigan had volunteered to provide it. "We found a curiosity, Your Majesty," Morrigan announced, her voice ringing through the suddenly silent hall. "A wolf without a wolf. A servant who wears an iron collar because she's too broken to be trusted without one." Guards seized Isolde before she could flee. They dragged her through the servants' entrance, through the gasps and whispers of the assembled nobility, and threw her onto the marble floor at the foot of the black iron throne. The impact split her lip. Blood pooled on the white stone. "This is Isolde Marin," Morrigan continued, circling her like a vulture. "She's been with the Thornwood Pack since infancy, a charity case. A mistake that should have been corrected years ago." She looked up at the throne, her eyes glittering with malice. "I thought Your Majesty might find her amusing." Isolde pushed herself up onto her knees. She could feel the weight of 1,000 stares, the disgust radiating from every corner of the hall. But only one gaze mattered. The Alpha King was looking at her. Not with disgust. Not with amusement. His amber gaze was fixed on her with an intensity that made her lungs forget how to function. He rose from his throne, a movement that sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. The Alpha King did not rise for anyone. He descended the steps slowly, his boots echoing in the deafening silence. When he stopped in front of Isolde, she had to crane her neck to look up at him. This close, his scent was overwhelming. Winter and cedar and that nameless ancient thing that made her blood sing. "Look at me," he commanded. Isolde looked. She couldn't have disobeyed if she wanted to. Kaelin studied her face with the focus of a man examining a blade he was about to purchase. His gaze traced the bruise on her cheek, the collar around her throat, the old scars peeking from beneath her threadbare servant's dress. Something flickered in his expression, something that looked almost like rage, but not at her. Then his eyes dropped to her neck, to the bare skin where a mate mark should have been. "You have no mate," he said. It wasn't a question, but it hung in the air like one. The hall held its breath. Isolde swallowed. The pull beneath her sternum was screaming now, clawing at her ribs, demanding she tell him everything. But she had learned long ago that the truth was a weapon that always turned on its wielder. "No, Your Majesty," she whispered. Kaelin leaned closer, close enough that his breath stirred the hair at her temple. "Why?" The question was soft, intimate, as if they were the only two people in the room. Isolde's hands trembled. She could lie. She could deflect. She could give him the easy answer, that she was broken, defective, unworthy of a bond. Instead, something cracked open inside her. "I rejected him," she breathed, so quietly that only an alpha's hearing could catch it. "My mate. I rejected him the way you're about to reject me." Kaelin went utterly still. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then, a growl ripped from the Alpha King's chest. It was not a sound of anger. It was something far more dangerous. Something primal. "She admits it!" Morrigan shrieked, lunging forward. "She's confessing to breaking a sacred bond. The punishment is death. She—" Silence. The word was barely above a whisper, but it hit the hall like a thunderclap. Morrigan staggered backward as if she'd been struck, her face draining of color. Every wolf in the room dropped their gaze to the floor. The betas fell to their knees. Even the alphas swayed under the pressure of the aura now pouring off the king like a living thing. But Isolde didn't look away. She couldn't. Kaelin's golden eyes had changed. They were no longer bored, no longer calculating. They were burning. "You rejected your fated mate," he said slowly, his voice rough as gravel. "And you expect me to reject you?" "Everyone does," Isolde whispered. Kaelin's hand shot out. His fingers closed around the iron collar at her throat, and with a single, savage twist, he ripped it free. The metal screamed. The ancient runes etched into its surface flared white-hot and died. And deep inside Isolde's chest, something that had been sleeping for 21 years, opened its eyes. The moment the collar hit the ground, Isolde's world shattered. Pain erupted from the base of her skull, not the dull ache of a blow, but something volcanic. It poured down her spine like molten silver, flooding every nerve, every cell, every forgotten corner of her being. She screamed, but the sound that tore from her throat wasn't human. It was a howl. The marble floor cracked beneath her palms. Her bones began to shift, to grow, snapping and reforming with sounds like breaking tree branches. Her servant's dress shredded as her spine elongated, as muscles she never knew she had rippled beneath skin that was suddenly too tight. "What's happening to her?" someone shrieked. "Get back!" Kaelin roared, throwing out an arm to force the crowd away. Everyone back. But no one could look away. Isolde's skin split, not with blood, but with light. Pure, blinding, white gold light poured from the fissures as fur began to emerge. Not the gray or brown or black of common wolves. This fur shimmered like crushed diamonds, like starlight woven into silk, like the surface of the moon itself. She rose on 4 legs and she kept rising. The wolf that stood in the great hall of Thornwood Keep was not a wolf at all. It was a creature from the old songs, the forbidden texts, the nightmares that alphas whispered to their children to keep them obedient. She stood 8 feet tall at the shoulder, her body rippling with barely contained power. Her eyes, once pale gray, now blazed with white fire, twin suns set in a face of living silver. The chandeliers exploded. Every candle in the hall snuffed out simultaneously, plunging the room into darkness lit only by the glow emanating from her fur. Wolves dropped. Not just omegas, not just betas, alphas. Territorial lords who had never bowed to anyone collapsed to their knees, their wolves howling submission inside their minds. The pressure radiating from Isolde was not mere dominance, it was divine. Finally, a voice thundered inside her skull, ancient, feminine, furious. Finally, you have set me free. Isolde, or the thing Isolde had become, turned her massive head toward the black iron throne, toward the one wolf still standing. Kalen Drakemore had not fallen. His eyes were wide, blazing gold, his chest heaving, but he stood rooted to the marble with his fists clenched at his sides. He was fighting her aura with everything he had. And he was smiling. There you are, he breathed, reverence bleeding through every syllable. I've been looking for you for 300 years. The silver wolf took a step toward him. The floor groaned under her weight. She lowered her head until her blazing eyes were level with his, until her breath, hot as forge fire, washed over his face. A low rumble built in her chest. Not a growl, not a threat. Recognition. You, the ancient voice whispered through Isolde's consciousness. You carry his blood. The one who saved me. The one who died for me. Kalen's smile faded. His hand lifted slowly, trembling almost imperceptibly, and pressed against the silver fur of her muzzle. I know what you are, he said softly, and I know what they did to you. The wolf shuddered. The light began to flicker, the divine energy draining as quickly as it had come. Isolde felt herself falling out of the wolf, out of the power, out of consciousness itself. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the Alpha King catching her naked human body in his arms. The last thing she heard was his voice, rough with an emotion she couldn't name. I've got you. No one will ever cage you again. Chaos erupted the moment the silver light faded. Seize her! Beta Voss bellowed, Morrigan's father surging forward with a contingent of Thornwood guards. She's a threat. A monster. She must be contained before... He never finished the sentence. Kalen didn't shift. He didn't need to. One moment he was cradling Isolde's unconscious form. The next, Beta Voss was pinned against a marble pillar with the Alpha King's hand around his throat, lifted 3 feet off the ground. You knew. Kalen's voice was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. You knew what she was, and you collared her like an animal. Voss's face purpled. His legs kicked uselessly in the air. I was following orders. The old Alpha is dead. Kalen's grip tightened. You are not. Yet. Your Majesty. A new voice cut through the pandemonium. Calm, authoritative, familiar with command. Perhaps we might discuss executions after we've secured the girl? Kalen's head turned. Standing in the archway of the great hall was a woman in midnight armor, her silver hair cropped short, her eyes the pale blue of glacial ice. Commander Seraphine Vael, leader of the Crown's Fang, the Alpha King's elite guard. She was flanked by 20 warriors in matching black, their faces obscured by wolf skull masks. "The keep is surrounded," Seraphine reported, striding forward. "No one leaves until you give the word." Her gaze dropped to Isolde's limp form and something flickered in her expression. "Is that—" "Yes." Kalen released Voss, letting the beta crumple to the floor in a gasping heap. He turned to face the crowd, the terrified nobles, the trembling alphas, the servants frozen in doorways. "This woman is under my protection. Anyone who touches her answers to me. Anyone who speaks against her answers to me." His golden eyes swept the hall like a scythe. "Anyone who knew about this collar and said nothing will answer to me." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Morrigan stood frozen near the dais, her face the color of curdled milk. She had wanted to humiliate Isolde. She had wanted entertainment. She had not expected to unleash a legend. Kalen walked toward the throne, Isolde still cradled against his chest. He didn't sit. He stood before it, a king holding a broken girl, and addressed the assembly with the weight of 3 centuries of rule. "The conclave is suspended. All visiting alphas will remain in the keep until further notice. Seraphine, Your Majesty." "My chambers. Bring a healer. A real one. Not whatever hedge witch has been tending to the servants." He looked down at Isolde's face, the bruises, the scars, the remnants of a life lived in shadow. "And find me every record this pack has on her. Birth documents, medical histories, transfer papers, everything." "It will be done." Kalen began walking toward the rear exit, his guard forming a perimeter around him. But he paused at the threshold, turning his head just enough to speak over his shoulder. "Morrigan Voss." Morrigan flinched as if struck. "You wanted to entertain me," Kalen said, his voice silken with menace. "Consider me entertained. We'll discuss your future when I'm finished with your father." He vanished into the darkness of the corridor, taking Isolde with him. Morrigan's knees buckled. She caught herself on a table, knocking over a goblet of wine that spread across the white tablecloth like blood. Around her, the whispers began. A silver wolf. They were supposed to be extinct. Did you see the Alpha King's face? He recognized her. This changes everything. The prophecy. Silence. Beta Voss staggered to his feet, clutching his bruised throat. "Not a word of this leaves the keep. Do you hear me? Not a single—" "The Alpha King gave no such order." Commander Seraphine's voice cut through his bluster. She hadn't left with the others. She stood in the center of the hall, hands clasped behind her back, surveying the assembled wolves with glacial contempt. "Which means this information belongs to the crown, not to Thornwood." She smiled. It was not a kind smile. "By dawn, every pack on the continent will know that the Silver Wolf has returned, and they will know that she belongs to King Kalen Drakemore." Seraphine turned on her heel and strode out, her soldiers falling into formation behind her. In the great hall of Thornwood Keep, surrounded by shattered chandeliers and cracked marble and the lingering scent of divine power, the wolves of the conclave began to understand that the world had just tilted on its axis. And at the center of that shift was a servant girl who had spent 21 years scrubbing floors. Isolde woke to warmth. It was such a foreign sensation that she thought, for a moment, she must be dead. The afterlife, she had always imagined, would be warm, a reward for surviving so much cold. But then she felt the silk beneath her fingers. Real silk, not the scratchy wool of her servant's cot. She smelled cedar smoke and something medicinal. She heard the crackle of a fire far larger than any she'd ever been allowed near. Her eyes flew open. She was lying in a bed the size of her entire former room, canopied in deep crimson velvet, piled with furs so soft they felt like clouds. The chamber around her was vast, vaulted ceilings, tapestries depicting ancient hunts, a fireplace carved from black stone where flames danced and roared, and sitting in a leather chair beside the bed, watching her with those molten amber eyes, was the Alpha King. Isolde scrambled upright, clutching the furs to her chest. She was wearing a thin shift. Someone had dressed her, but she had never felt more exposed. Easy? Kaelin raised a hand, palm out. You're safe. You're in my private chambers in the North Tower. No one enters without my permission. Why? The words scraped out of her throat like broken glass. Why am I here? What happened? What? She stopped, memories crashing over her like a tidal wave. The collar, the pain, the wolf, the light. Her hand flew to her throat, bare skin, no iron, no runes. It's gone, Kaelin confirmed, and it's never going back. Isolde's breath came in short, sharp gasps. What am I? What was that thing inside me? I can't. You can. Kaelin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. This close, without the throne, without the crowd. He looked almost human, tired, ancient, burdened. And you will. But first, you need to understand what was taken from you. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of parchment yellowed with age. This was hidden in the Thornwood archives, buried under 17 levels of falsified records. He handed it to her. Your birth certificate. Your real one. Isolde's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The words swam before her eyes, but slowly they came into focus. Name, Isolde Elindra, Calem born, 21st day of the frost moon. Mother, High Priestess Serenith Calem, father, unknown bloodline, Lunaris Argentum. Lunaris Argentum, Isolde whispered. I don't know what that means. It means you are not a packless wolf. Kaelin's voice was low, reverent. You are the last living descendant of the Silver Wolves, the original bloodline, the ones who ruled before the Alphas, before the Packs, before the hierarchy existed at all. Your ancestors didn't bow to kings. His golden eyes burned into hers. They made kings. Isolde shook her head, the parchment crinkling in her grip. That's impossible. I'm a servant. I scrub floors. You were drugged. Kaelin's jaw tightened. The collar wasn't just iron. It was infused with moonsbane, a poison that suppresses the wolf, clouds the mind, severs the bond between spirit and beast. They've been feeding it to you since you were an infant. The room tilted. Isolde pressed a hand to her forehead, fighting nausea. My mother, she managed. The certificate says she was a high priestess. What happened to her? Kaelin was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with old grief. She was murdered. 21 years ago, on the night you were born, a faction called the Ember Covenant. Fanatics who believed the Silver Wolves were abominations, that their power upset the natural order. He paused. Your mother's protectors smuggled you out of the temple and brought you to Thornwood, begging the old Alpha to hide you. He agreed, but he feared what you might become. So he caged you instead. Caged me, Isolde repeated, the words ash in her mouth. You were never broken, Isolde. Kaelin reached out, his fingers hovering just above her cheek, not quite touching. You were buried alive. And tonight, you clawed your way out of the grave. Isolde looked at him, this ancient king with his burning eyes and his 300 years of searching. Why do you care? She asked. Why does any of this matter to you? Kaelin's expression shifted. Something raw flickered beneath the mask of authority. Because 3 centuries ago, a silver wolf saved my life, he said quietly, and I swore on her dying breath that I would find her heir, that I would protect what she could not. He finally let his fingers brush her cheek. The touch was feather-light, electric. I've been waiting for you, Isolde, and I am not letting you go. The door to Kaelin's chambers exploded inward. Isolde flinched, instinctively pulling the furs tighter. Kalen was on his feet in an instant, a snarl ripping from his throat as he placed himself between her and the intruder. But it wasn't the Ember Covenant. It wasn't an assassin. It was a man. He stood in the ruined doorway, chest heaving, eyes wild with something between desperation and fury. He was handsome in a sharp, cruel way, dark hair, pale eyes, a jaw that looked carved from granite. His clothes were travel-stained, his boots caked with mud. He had ridden hard to get here. Isolde. Her name fell from his lips like a prayer, like a curse. Isolde's blood turned to ice. Draven, she whispered. Kalen's head snapped toward her. You know this wolf? Know her? Draven laughed, a broken, jagged sound. She's my mate, my fated mate, the one who ripped out my heart and left me bleeding in the snow 3 years ago. The temperature in the room plummeted. Kalen's gaze narrowed to slits, the gold in his irises hardening to bronze. You're the one she rejected. Rejected? Draven spat the word like poison. She didn't just reject me, she destroyed me. Do you have any idea what it feels like to have your bond severed? To feel your wolf howling for someone who chose to walk away? He took a step forward, his pale eyes locked on Isolde. I've spent 3 years tracking you, 3 years of agony. And now I find you in his bed? She's not in my bed, Kalen said, his voice deadly calm. Yet, Draven snarled. She belongs to me. The rejection wasn't complete. She never spoke the final words. The bond is damaged, not destroyed. I can still feel her. I can still claim her. You can try. Kalen smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just been handed entertainment. But I should warn you, I've killed men for far less than breaking down my door. Enough. Isolde's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Both men turned to look at her. She rose from the bed, the thin shift doing nothing to diminish the authority suddenly radiating from her small frame. Her eyes, once pale gray, now flickered with traces of white fire. I rejected you, Draven, because you tried to sell me to slavers to pay your gambling debts. Her voice was ice. I didn't speak the final words because you didn't deserve the mercy of a clean break. You deserved to suffer. Draven's face contorted. I am not your mate. Isolde stepped forward, and the air around her shimmered. I am not your property, and if you ever speak to me again, I will finish what I started 3 years ago. She looked at Kalen. Get him out of my sight. Kalen's smile widened into something almost feral. With pleasure. The throne room of Thornwood Keep had been transformed into a court of judgment. Isolde stood at the center of the hall, no longer in a servant's rags, but in a gown of silver silk that Commander Seraphine had procured from somewhere. Her pale hair was braided back from her face, and the absence of the iron collar revealed the elegant column of her throat for the first time in 21 years. She looked like what she was, a queen in exile, finally returned. Arranged before her were the wolves who would decide her fate, the Council of Alphas, 7 territorial lords who govern the continent's packs in matters of law and tradition. They sat in high-backed chairs, their faces carved from stone, their eyes assessing. Kalen stood to her right, a silent pillar of menace. Draven knelt in chains to her left, his pale eyes burning with hatred. This tribunal is convened, Elder Cormac announced, his voice echoing through the chamber, to address the matter of the incomplete mate bond between Draven Ashford of the Hollowmere Pack and Isolde. Calum, of the Lunaris Argentum. A murmur rippled through the assembly. The revelation of her bloodline had spread like wildfire. Every wolf in the room knew they were looking at a legend. The law is clear. Draven's advocate, a weasel-faced beta named Soren, spoke up. A rejection must be spoken by both parties and sealed by the moon's witness. The accused never completed the ritual. Therefore, the bond remains intact, and Draven Ashford retains his claim. His claim to what? Isolde's voice rang out, clear and cold. To a woman he tried to sell into slavery? To a bond he intended to exploit for profit? Those are serious accusations, Elder Cormac said. Do you have proof? I have scars. Isolde's chin lifted. I have 3 years of running, and I have the testimony of the slaver he negotiated with, a man named Vex Morrow, currently rotting in the dungeons of the Iron Coast. Draven lunged against his chains. Lies. She's lying to escape her obligations. Silence. Kaelin's voice was soft, but Draven's mouth snapped shut as if physically forced. The Alpha King stepped forward, addressing the council. I invoke the right of sovereign interest. The elders exchanged glances. On what grounds? Elder Cormac asked carefully. On the grounds that Isolde Caelum is the last of the Lunaris Argentum, a bloodline that predates your laws, your councils, and your hierarchies. Kaelin's golden eyes swept the tribunal. She does not fall under pact jurisdiction. She falls under mine. The king cannot simply claim every wolf he fancies, Soren protested. I'm not claiming her. Kaelin turned to look at Isolde, and something electric passed between them. I'm offering her a choice. He extended his hand toward her. You can submit to this tribunal and let these relics decide your fate. Or you can invoke the trial of sovereignty, an ancient right that allows a contested wolf to fight for their own freedom. Isolde's heart hammered. Fight whom? Draven's champion. Or Draven himself, if he has the spine? Draven's face twisted. I'll fight. I'll drag her back to Hollomere in chains if I have to. Then it's settled. Elder Cormac rose, his expression grave. The trial of sovereignty will commence at moonrise. The victor claims the bond, or destroys it forever. Isolde looked at Kaelin, at his extended hand, at the choice he was offering her. Fight for yourself, his eyes seemed to say. Show them what you are. She reached out and took his hand. I'll fight my own battle, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. And when I'm done, Draven Ashford will never speak my name again. The council rose, the tribunal dispersed, and in the shadows of the great hall, Draven watched Isolde walk away on the arm of the Alpha King, his pale eyes promising violence. The arena of bones was older than the packs themselves. It was a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside behind Thornwood Keep, its floor littered with the bleached remains of wolves who had fought and fallen across millennia. The seats, hewn from raw stone, rose in concentric circles, packed tonight with every wolf who could claim attendance. The moon hung fat and silver overhead, casting the arena in ghostly light. Isolde stood at the northern entrance, barefoot on the cold stone, wearing the same tactical suit Seraphine had provided, black, flexible, designed for a shift. Her heart was a war drum in her chest, but her hands were steady. You've never fought, the old voice of doubt whispered. You've only ever survived. Survival is fighting, the new voice, the wolf's voice, answered. And we have been fighting since the day we were born. Across the arena, Draven emerged from the southern gate. He had stripped to the waist, revealing a torso roped with muscle and crisscrossed with old scars. He was bigger than her, stronger in the conventional sense. He had trained for combat his entire life, but he had never faced a silver wolf. Rules of the trial. Elder Cormac's magically amplified voice boomed across the arena. No weapons, no outside interference. Shift is permitted. The fight ends when one wolf yields, falls unconscious, or dies. The moon bears witness. Isolde's gaze found Kaelin in the royal box. He sat motionless, his stare fixed on her with an intensity that burned even across the distance. He had wanted to fight for her. She had seen it in every line of his body when she refused. But this was her battle, her freedom, her life. She would not be saved. She would save herself. Begin. Draven didn't waste time with posturing. He shifted mid-charge, his body exploding into a massive gray wolf with slavering jaws and murder in his eyes. He crossed the arena in 3 bounds, aiming for her throat. Isolde didn't move. At the last possible second, she dropped. Draven sailed over her head, his claws raking empty air. He hit the ground in a skid, spinning with a snarl of frustration. "Running won't save you," he growled, his voice distorted by the wolf's muzzle. "It never has." Isolde rose slowly. She could feel the wolf inside her, coiled and ready, begging to be released. But not yet. Not until he understood exactly what he was facing. "I'm not running, Draven." She began to circle him, her bare feet silent on the ancient stone. "I'm giving you a chance to yield. One chance. Take it." He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Yield to you? You're nothing. You were nothing when I found you, and you'll be nothing when I'm done with you." "I was never nothing." Isolde stopped circling. Her eyes began to glow. "I was sleeping." She let go. The shift took her like a wave, not painful this time, but exhilarating. Power flooded her veins as her bones reshaped, as her skin split to reveal silver fur, as she rose and rose and rose until she towered over Draven's gray wolf like a goddess over a dog. The crowd gasped. Some screamed. Several wolves in the lower seats scrambled backward, their instincts overwhelming their dignity. Draven, to his credit, didn't flee. His gray wolf crouched low, hackles raised, teeth bared. But his eyes were filled with terror. "Submit," Isolde's wolf commanded, the word slamming into Draven's mind like a battering ram. He staggered. His front legs buckled. But he caught himself, snarling, fighting the compulsion with everything he had. "Never," he spat. "You're mine." He launched himself at her, a desperate, reckless attack born of wounded pride. Isolde caught him by the throat. Her massive jaws closed around his neck, not quite breaking skin, but holding him immobile as easily as a mother cat holds a kitten. Draven thrashed, claws scrabbling against her chest, drawing thin lines of blood that healed almost instantly. She could kill him. One bite and it would be over. The bond would snap, and he would never hurt anyone again. But death was too quick, too clean, too merciful. Isolde threw him. Draven's wolf flew across the arena, hit the stone wall with a sickening crack, and crumpled to the ground. He shifted back involuntarily, the pain forcing his human form to the surface. He lay in a broken heap, gasping, and one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Isolde stalked toward him, each step shaking the ground. She stopped with one massive paw on his chest, pinning him to the stone. Her blazing white eyes stared down into his pale, terrified gaze. "Say the words," she commanded. "Complete the rejection. Release me, and I will let you live." "I." Draven coughed blood. "I reject. I reject you, Isolde Calum, as my mate and bond." "And I accept your rejection," Isolde's wolf responded, the ancient words reverberating through both their souls. "The bond is severed. The claim is void. You are nothing to me." A flash of silver light erupted from both of them, visible only to those with the gift to see, as the damaged bond finally, irrevocably, shattered. Draven screamed. It was the sound of a man losing something he had never deserved. Isolde stepped back and let the shift recede. She stood naked and bloody in the moonlight, chest heaving, surrounded by the bones of ancient wolves. The arena was silent. Then Kalen rose from his seat, and the crowd erupted. Kalen reached her before anyone else could. His coat was around her shoulders in an instant, his arm a steel band at her waist, holding her upright as the adrenaline crash threatened to buckle her knees. "You magnificent creature," he breathed against her hair. "You absolute terror." Isolde laughed, a raw, exhausted sound. "I think I broke his arm. You broke far more than that." She leaned into him, letting his strength support her weight. But something was wrong. The heat of battle wasn't fading. If anything, it was intensifying, spreading from her core outward, setting every nerve ending on fire. Kaelin. Her voice came out strangled. Something's happening. He went rigid. She felt him inhale sharply against her temple, and then his whole body shuddered. Isolde. His voice was barely controlled. You're sent. She didn't understand, but the wolves in the arena did. A low, collective growl began to build, not hostile, but hungry. Heads were turning. Nostrils were flaring. In the stands, unmated alphas were rising to their feet, their eyes glazing over with something primal and dangerous. The shift triggered her cycle. Commander Seraphine's voice cut through the haze, sharp with urgency. She was suddenly at their side, her soldiers forming a barrier. She's going into heat. We need to move, now. Kaelin scooped Isolde into his arms without hesitation. Clear a path to the keep. Already done. But Your Majesty. Seraphine's jaw tightened. We have a bigger problem. An explosion rocked the mountainside. Isolde's head snapped toward the sound. In the distance, beyond the arena, beyond the keep, the northern tree line was burning. Figures were pouring through the flames, dozens, hundreds, clad in crimson robes, their faces hidden behind masks of hammered bronze. Ember Covenant, Seraphine spat. They must have been waiting for the trial to draw out our forces. Another explosion. Closer this time. Screams erupted from the crowd as wolves scrambled for exits. They're here for me, Isolde realized, horror cutting through the heat fog. They've come to finish what they started. They'll have to go through me first. Kaelin's arms tightened around her. Seraphine, get every combat-ready wolf to the northern wall. Evacuate the civilians to the inner keep, and find me a secured room with moonstone wards. The ritual chamber beneath the throne room, it's the only place strong enough. Then that's where we go. Kaelin ran. Around them, chaos erupted. Guards shouting orders, wolves shifting mid-stride, the distant clash of steel and claw. But Isolde barely heard it. The heat was consuming her, the scent of Kaelin flooding her senses, her wolf howling for something she didn't fully understand. Stay with me, Kaelin commanded, his burning gaze locked on hers. We're going to get through this. And then? Isolde gasped. His jaw clenched, his grip tightened. And then, we deal with everything. They never made it to the ritual chamber. The Ember Covenant had anticipated their route. A wall of crimson-robed fanatics blocked the corridor, led by a figure in robes of black and gold, a woman with a shaved head and eyes that burned with zealous fire. High Priestess of the Ember? Seraphine growled, drawing her blade. Vespera Kane. Commander. Vespera smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. Stand aside. We have no quarrel with the crown, we only want the abomination. The abomination, Kaelin said softly, is under my protection. Then you will die with her. Vespera raised her hand, and the fanatics behind her began to chant, a guttural, discordant sound that made Isolde's bones vibrate. That's a binding ritual, Seraphine warned. They're trying to suppress her wolf. Isolde felt it, the invisible chains wrapping around her chest, squeezing the breath from her lungs. The heat in her blood flickered, dimming. Her wolf howled in rage and terror. Put me down, she gasped. Isolde! Put me down. Kaelin lowered her to her feet, keeping one hand on her arm. His eyes were wild with barely restrained violence. Tell me what you need. Isolde closed her eyes. The binding ritual was tightening, crushing her power back into the cage she had only just escaped. She could feel her wolf retreating, feel the divine fire guttering out. No, she thought, I will not be buried again. She reached deeper than she ever had before. Past the wolf, past the power, past the bloodline itself. She reached for the source, for the moon. Mother, she prayed to a goddess she had never known. Help me." And the goddess answered. Silver light exploded from Isolde's body, not the glow of her wolf, but something far older, far more terrifying. The binding ritual shattered like glass. The chanting stopped as every fanatic in the corridor was thrown backward by the shockwave. Isolde rose into the air. Her feet left the ground. Her hair floated around her face like she was underwater. Her eyes were no longer white. They were silver, polished mirrors reflecting the moon that couldn't possibly be visible underground. "You dare!" The voice that emerged from her throat was not hers. It was layered, 1,000 voices speaking in harmony, ancient and furious. "You dare to hunt my children. You dare to cage my blood. You dare to stand before me and demand death." Vespera's zealous confidence crumbled. She stumbled backward, genuine terror cracking her facade. "Impossible. The Lunaris Argentum are vessels, not conduits. You can't. I am not a vessel." Isolde, or the thing wearing Isolde's body, raised her hand. "I am the last, and I am done hiding." She clenched her fist. Every Ember Covenant fanatic in the corridor screamed as silver fire erupted from within their bodies, burning them from the inside out, leaving nothing but ash and the fading echo of their hatred. Vespera alone remained, held immobile by an invisible force. "You murdered my mother." The 1,000 voices had faded to one, Isolde's voice, but cold. So cold. "You hunted my bloodline to extinction. You would have done the same to me." "Please," Vespera whispered. "Mercy." My mother begged for mercy. Isolde floated closer until she was inches from the high priestess's face. "Did you grant it?" Silence. "I thought not." The silver fire consumed Vespera Caney. She didn't even have time to scream. Isolde drifted back to the ground. The glow faded. The divine presence receded, leaving her hollow, exhausted, and utterly free. She swayed. Kaelin caught her. "That was—" Seraphine trailed off, unable to find words. "That was justice," Isolde whispered. 300 years overdue. She looked up at Kaelin. The heat was still there, banked now, but burning. His eyes had turned black with want, with awe, with something that looked terrifyingly like devotion. "Take me somewhere safe," she said. "Where?" She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her palm. "Anywhere you are." Kaelin's control shattered. He kissed her. Fierce, claiming, desperate, right there in the ash-covered corridor, with his commander watching and the battle still raging above. He kissed her like she was air, and he was drowning. And Isolde kissed him back. 6 months later, the Crimson Conclave reconvened. But this time, the great hall of Thornwood Keep had been transformed. The crimson silk was gone, replaced by banners of silver and black. The black iron throne had been melted down and reforged into something new. 2 thrones, side by side, equal in height, equal in power. Isolde stood before the assembly in a gown of moonlight and shadow, a crown of woven silver resting on her pale hair. Beside her, Kaelin wore the formal regalia of the Alpha King, but his eyes, as always, were fixed only on her. "By the authority of the ancient laws," Elder Cormac intoned, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "And by the witness of the moon herself I present to you, Queen Isolde Calum Drakemore, sovereign of the Lunaris Argentum, mate of the Alpha King, and protector of all Pax." The crowd erupted. In the front row, Commander Seraphine stood at attention, a rare smile softening her glacial features. Beside her, a contingent of Silver Guard, the new order Isolde had founded, stood in polished armor, their loyalty absolute. In the back of the hall, nearly invisible in the shadows, Draven Ashford watched. His arm had healed crooked. His wolf had never fully recovered. But he had come to witness what he had lost and to finally, truly, let go. He slipped out before the ceremony ended. No one noticed. No one cared. Behind the throne, in a position of servitude she would occupy for the rest of her days, Morrigan Voss knelt with her head bowed. The once proud Beta's daughter now wore the gray uniform of a palace attendant. Every day she polished the thrones. Every day, she remembered. Isolde took Kaelin's hand as they stepped forward to address their people. "They called me a ghost," she said, her voice ringing clear. "They called me broken. They buried me alive and expected me to stay dead." She smiled, fierce, triumphant, and free. They were wrong. If you loved this story and want more tales of wolves, crowns, and the women who rise from the ashes, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.